This is Buffalo, What's Next? I'm Jay Moran.
I'm Bridget Paul Valenza.
And I'm Dave Debo. If ever there was an issue that demands more discussion now, the racist massacre at Tops Friendly Markets on May 14th is it.
You know, America has a long, deep, rich history of racism brutalizing black communities.
But where does it go from here? What does our community need?
We must work and teach our children.
What issues just aren't being addressed?
As long as we keep doing the same thing, we're just sitting ducks for the next mass shooting. That's all you can say.
This is a new program. Every weekday, we'll set aside this hour to hear from the community about issues that can no longer be held back.
We need to make a concerted effort in our nation, in our institutions, and yes, in our families.
Thank you for joining us. I'm host Bridget Paul Valenza. Later in the program, Jay Moran will speak with journalist Madison Carter, formerly from WKBW, about her time in Buffalo and recent return to cover the tragedy. Today is June 14th and marks 1 month since the shooting. Dave Debo looks back on earlier episodes of Buffalo What's Next, which highlight themes of grief, anger, and action. But first, I'm Bridget Paul Valenza, and I'm joined today by Drea Denor.
Hi, Bridget.
Hi. How are you?
Man, that question used to be so easy to answer.
I know.
I'm good.
But not anymore. I mean...
No,
not anymore.
I'm not okay.
It's okay to not be okay. I think that there are people out there who need to be strong, but I think we also, for our own mental health, for our own spiritual well-being, have to take those moments, take that time to sit with ourselves, to not make it better, but at least settle into our souls to understand that, yeah, I'm not okay, and it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay.
I agree.
Your resume reads Mother, Buffalo native music and visual artist, archival researcher, evidence collector, community organizer, and activist. That's a whole lot of words. That's a whole lot of words. What, tell me about some of that.
Being a mother of 5 children, my oldest is 20. She's ending her second year at Oberlin University. And then I have a 7-year-old and everybody in between, 7, 11.
So not busy.
13, 15, and 20.
Oh, wow.
It's important to know that because I think that when you see a black woman in the world showing up for everybody but herself, but everybody who's connected to herself, you know, it should be acknowledged and honored that she's bringing all of that with her every time. And it's really just you learn to just this balancing act. You know, you're always working on that.
Yeah.
So for me, being a mother gives meaning to everything else that I do. So being an activist, I didn't even like to embrace that word until very recently. But in the tradition of people who have died in honor of holding that title, I accept that mantle. And I'm willing to do what must be done to help us be seen, and help us to move forward.
Visual and music, where does that come from? How do the things around you influence that portion of what you do?
Well, I don't see myself. Well, first, let me just say, for those who don't know, I'm a singer, and I play the piano. I write music. I I produce music, and I'm very visual. So if you come to a show, which I call offerings, not concerts, then you're going to be stimulated in every way, you know?
Fully sense all your senses.
And what you're seeing and experiencing comes from a vision that I had. So when I say visual artist, I don't necessarily paint, but I see visions. And I feel like as an artist, it's my job to bring that forward. So I hold what you feel. And my job is to hold it so deeply that I can put a sound to it. And when you hear that sound, I think the sound is healing because it's something that resonates with you and within you and stays with you. And you're like, okay, yeah, that's exactly how I feel. Now I can go and press play and hear that song, you know? That's what I do with my music. So I do have a lot. I have a sound to make, and I'll be making very soon, that I've been holding on to because I've been absorbing and observing a lot.
How is the community? So as a visual artist or an artist that sees visions per se, and as an audio artist, someone who, what are the colors of the neighborhood? What are the sounds? What are the notes of the neighborhood right now?
I think everything is red right now. Everything is red. Red for me represents fire. For me, red, depending on the shade, can also represent blood. I think there's a lot of blood that's still in the pavements. You can't wipe that up.
Or wash it away.
And you can't wash it away. And I think the soil now holds blood that people are eager to wash away. And that is enraging.
It's not something that can be or should be erased or just moved aside for the sake of comfortability, progress. I mean, there needs to be a remembrance of the events, and that does need to percolate. It needs to stay with us to inform our action.
I've been working on a project for 2 years since the murder of George Floyd, an attempt to heal myself and to maybe offer healing to other people. I've been working on a project called Reimagine Black Death, expanding the testimony through remembrance. So it's interesting that you use that word, remembrance, but I think we need to reimagine as a collective of human beings what Black death means, has meant, means right now, and should mean. And Black death should not be lessened in any way. You know, when you hear, I know people who mourn dogs, mourn the death of dogs and cats and other animals more than they mourn the loss of Black life. Yeah. And I want to say that because it needs to be reimagined. A life was violently taken. 10 lives were violently taken. 3 were attempted to be taken, and maybe even more. And so what does that mean? Why is it so easy for people to just like wash that away and move on? Why do we need to move on? Why can't we sit in that and mourn and evaluate what that means and just feel it? You know, I'm concerned that people are not feeling anymore. Like, that feels so subhuman to not feel.
Do you think that not feeling comes because, especially or specifically then, in that community, because of all of the trauma that is faced on a daily basis, that, you know, you become numb to it? And I don't know that it's an aversion, but it's just, this is my life. This is how it is, so I have to deal with it, or else I will just lay down and stop.
Yeah, I think numbness is very real and should be named, especially in the Black community. You know, we've been taught to be numb. And there's this idea of survival that you're trying to navigate. You know, I do understand that, but I think talking about those who are not in the community and are not directly impacted by what happened, or who they think they're not directly impacted by what happened, you know, that's a different level of numbness to look at it and see it and read about it, and then within 30 days you've already moved on. That's something else. I don't think that's just being numb. I think that's something else.
Willfully blind, maybe, or ignorant. Selective
amnesia, like my grandfather loves to say.
Selective amnesia. You're listening to Buffalo What's Next, where we unapologetically have open and honest conversations. You can join us by leaving a comment or question through the Talk to Us feature on our app. We're here with Drea and Dor, a very busy Denor, a very busy woman who's been working in the trenches with our East Side neighbors. One of the things that you have done is Feed Buffalo, Western New York's first organic halal food resource. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so Feed Buffalo, I created that just out of a need. You know, I was trying to feed my own family. My children's father is Muslim. My family is a Muslim family, and I needed to go to pantries myself several times. Had a full-time job, but still struggled to feed my family, which I told you guys I have 5 children. So, and then wanting to give them healthy food,
right.
Wanting to prioritize the healthy options and lifestyle. I didn't see that, and you know, in the pantries that I went to. And I would go to my grandmother's house a lot of times around dinner time because I knew she would offer me something. And then she has a pantry right outside of her kitchen. And she would just give me a bag and say, take whatever you want. And never brought it up, never made me feel bad about it. And I said, one day I want to open a place that gives me the same feeling that I get when I go to my grandmother's house, but offers only the best option. I don't want people to feel like they have to leave and go look for something good, but they can get all the things that you would get if you had your ideal budget there for free because you deserve it. So that's what Feed Buffalo is. It's about dignity. It's about honoring choice. It's about thoughtfulness and considering those who have other lifestyles. They need halal food. They need gluten-free because of medical reasons. You know, we have all of that at Feed Buffalo.
There are major health disparities between the Black community and the white community.
Absolutely.
How does food and food apartheid make that problem even worse?
So when you think about a lot of the conditions, the health conditions within our communities, a lot of them are caused or sustained by food and can also be cured by food. Mm-hmm. So I think access is so important because it's like, well, why would you not, like, why is there not a place like Whole Foods in the east side of Buffalo? Why not?
Right.
Why are all the farmers market on other parts of Buffalo, but there's no healthy farmers market directly in the east side of Buffalo? I hear discussions of some coming perhaps, but why not? You know, and I've often asked myself, like, well, who profits from that? Who profits from poverty? Who profits from illnesses? What community, what group of people profits from that? These are questions you have to ask yourself, you know? So when you limit that access and you only put maybe one grocery store that arguably was subpar in a Black community, and fill it with other types of organizations, food organizations, if you want to call it that serve things that I don't consider to be food, that are genetically modified. You have to ask yourself, why are we putting funding here and not here if you're actually concerned about people? So, yeah, when I think of Feed Buffalo and why we exist, it's because I think COVID gave us a preview of what's going to come. Grocery stores were closed, and shelves are very, very bare these days still. So what are we going to do? How are we going to survive that? How are we going to move forward? And we're seeing a glimpse of that in response to what happened on 5/14. You see people coming into the community, and now magically everybody has food. Everybody wants to give now, right? But that's already gone. That lasts just a couple of weeks, but it can happen. And I think the only way we're going to survive and move forward is for us to be producing our own foods and sharing resources with one another. So basically, essentially remembering and returning back to indigenous practices, for me, is the only way we can move forward.
Do you think that that's something that will be embraced in the community? I mean, ultimately, we all do love convenience to a certain extent. We love to just go to the market, get our groceries and go. Arguably, some people would say this is more difficult. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that 5/14, the events, the tragic murders that happened, forced us to be in a position, in a space that we don't necessarily prefer to be in, right? Mm-hmm. But in that space, there's this weird moment of discovery too. You discover, wow, there are resources. Wow, we actually can share. Wow, we actually could work together. Imagine or reimagine us doing that all the time. You know what I'm saying? So, yes, a grocery store might feel convenient. It's only convenient until they don't have what you want. It's only convenient until you get sick because of something that you ate. It's only convenient until you can't afford it. It's only convenient until you can't make it to the grocery store. You know what I mean? When I grew up, we used to, Miss Richardson used to live next door to my grandmother, and we would go to her house and we can get some sugar or some rice or just something until you made it to the grocery store. Now we don't even know our neighbors. You know what I mean? We don't talk to our neighbors anymore, at least not in my communities, because a lot of people, I live in a community where I have different neighbors every 6 months, and people don't even talk to each other enough to say, did you eat today?
Right. That's probably a bit less sign of the times, or a bit more sign of the times, in terms of our convenience, sort of a very, very much not looking out for our neighbor, and self-preservation. What part do you feel racism plays in that?
I want to say that I believe that racism is rooted in fear. People like to promote words like hate, but for me, the opposite of love is fear. It's fear. Racism is rooted in fear. What are you afraid of? Why? If you peel all the layers, what are you afraid of? And Toni Morrison said, who are you without your race, your idea, your construct of race? Who are you? And I think it's important for those who are racist, and for all of these, and for those who sustain these systems, these racist systems, they have to ask themselves that question, about questions about racism. To me, I'm not interested in those discussions so much because I think some of the discussions sustain the constructs. I think all of the constructs should be destroyed. And I think we need to I know it's kind of radical, but I do think we should reevaluate what love means, what humanity means, and to allow ourselves to be totally and completely driven by that instead of the opposite of that, which I think is fear.
Do you feel that conversations are the way to move us forward? How do we move forward?
I personally believe that we've had lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of conversations. I think what we need is action. I think we need changed action. Some people say talk is cheap. I think conversations can be meaningful if the people who are having the conversation are open and respect what other people are bringing to the table. But I think, and I also think conversations can shed light on the position of the heart. And I think the position of the heart will kind of motivate what actions or inactions we take.
So what does that action look like to you?
To me?
Yeah.
Wow. To me, it looks like sharing resources. To me, it looks like being honest with self. To me, it looks like doing the work. I do think non-Black people need to do the work of tearing down these racist systems that are sustained in our communities. They have to do that work. You know what I mean? And then continue to support beyond tragic moments. I think, and when you come into Black communities, don't come with a position of, or a mindset of, I'm the savior. I'm here to save you and make everything better. Come understanding that you might be in this position one day. You might need help. Maybe you needed help. Maybe your mother needed help. Maybe your children or your grandchildren will need help one day. And you will want someone to share those resources and to honor them just for their humanity and no other reason.
I think it's important for everyone to have allies, but your allies also need to be self-aware and understand the roles and the positions that they need to play in having conversations, in actions, for understanding what a community needs. The community knows what it needs. Drea, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you. I am so glad that you're with us. Up next, Jay Moran speaks with journalist Madison Carter. We'll be right back.
This is Buffalo What's Next, where we have conversations with the community about moving forward. To have your voice heard, press the Talk to Us button on the WBFO app, and we'll work to get your questions and comments on the air. Join us on Twitter at WBFO or email us at news@wbfo.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
And welcome back to Buffalo What's Next. Our next guest is very familiar to Buffalo TV audiences, Madison Carter, formerly of Channel 7 here in Buffalo. Spent about 3 years here, now with 11 Alive in Atlanta. A couple of other interesting elements here with Madison. She also came back and reported in Buffalo following the May 14th shootings at the Jefferson Avenue Tops for WGRZ TV. Madison, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be with you.
We've got a lot to talk about here, but you didn't lose your connections. It wasn't that long a time ago that you were in Buffalo. So if you could just take us back to your first impressions when you heard about the shootings on Jefferson Avenue.
Yeah, I mean, Buffalo, I always tell people I'm DMV born. I was born outside of D.C., but I say I'm Buffalo bred because my time there just really shaped me as a human being. I still have so many friends, people I consider family in Buffalo, and that's really how I started hearing about it. Some former journalists who were in Buffalo started reaching out to me that Saturday afternoon. Have you heard about what happened? And as soon as I heard, I got home and I turned on the TV, and I turned on Channel 7 where I used to work, and I'm watching the wall-to-wall coverage. Ashley Rowe was on. The reporters were in the field. I'm scrolling through my phone on Twitter, trying to get as many details as possible. Stories that I had been working on during my time in Buffalo that I wasn't able to complete were just popping into my head. And then I started getting messages from friends, from close friends. And I remember one message he said that his aunt was killed. And that was Pearlie Young, and that's when it really hit me. I was like, I know this community so deeply, like that I'm being impacted by what happened. I know someone who knows someone who was killed, and that's when it really started to set in for me what was going on.
And then you get the call to come here to actually cover it because the station that you work with in Atlanta is the owner is the same that owns WGRZ TV here in Buffalo. So you come to Buffalo. Now give me your first impressions about your reporting and what you saw when you came here. And again, maybe take us through that understanding of the neighborhood that was impacted here that really a lot of Western New Yorkers don't have an understanding of.
I think my first impressions and my first emotions were on the plane, and it was honestly disappointment. Because I remember covering the riots after George Floyd's death a few years ago, and at that time I was president of the Buffalo Association of Black Journalists, and I remember being out there and I sent out this tweet that got a lot of traction. And I said, I was the only black journalist that was covering those riots, and after that there was so much momentum. I met with all of the newsroom leaders, and they said, you're right, this was not acceptable. We need to make sure our newsrooms are in a place to be able to respond if there's another racially charged incident or racially motivated incident, and we're going to make sure we're in a position if this happens again. So when I say disappointment, it was disappointment because I was once again on a plane being flown into a community because the newsrooms were not in a position to respond to that community once again. And so I kind of felt a little let down that that mission wasn't accomplished of making sure our newsrooms had diversified enough. And let me pause here and say that the coverage was outstanding.
Sure.
It was great. It was fantastic. The journalists they're strong journalists, but you come into that community, like had they been there before? When was the last time a lot of those journalists had been over there with or without a camera? Did they know anybody? I went and I saw friends, family, neighbor. My next door neighbor was standing next to me on the sidewalk when I was over there. And so that was sort of my first emotion. I was a little sad that we still didn't have diverse newsrooms to where they had enough sources. I remember I was still pulling out sources from. I didn't even have my work phone anymore. So I kind of wish that we had done a better job in Buffalo of responding. Yeah,
and in that regard, I'll kind of jump into a different topic that I was going to come to later in this conversation, but you really touched upon it there. I know the NABJ did a survey of the local newsrooms. I think it was maybe a year ago when you were still here, and talked about the lack of people of color in the newsrooms here. Let's just ask a question from your perspective. How has it impacted Buffalo, from what you understand, from your time here in Buffalo? How has it impacted Buffalo in a negative sense for not having that representation on TV, in radio, here in Buffalo?
It's made it so that people only hear about people in the black community when there's something wrong. I remember getting hired and they told me, hey, make sure you don't live on the east side. And I said, why? And I remember eventually, after a couple of years of being there, I used to just turn to people and say, they're just black people. Like, it's just black people. It's okay. They're just black people. There's nothing wrong. And I think that, and it's not even that there's something wrong or there's something nefarious. People go to where they're comfortable.
Sure.
I would be there because I was comfortable. Everybody flocks to their own communities. And so I think it's impacted it negatively because it's othered any news that has to do with black people because people are uncomfortable and they're, worried they're not going to have the proper perspective. So they just stay away from it entirely. And that's not helpful for others because no one really understood the needs of that community until there was something wrong and no one cares. So I really think that's why it's important to have different kinds of people in newsrooms so that they can be plugged into different communities so that you can respond appropriately and with proper perspective if something's wrong or, when there are positive things happening as well.
Yeah, and I wanted to get into that because that is one of the things one of the types of questions we've had here the last couple of weeks. Talk about the strengths of those neighborhoods. What makes them special?
Yeah, I love that question. It's the community. And even being away from Buffalo, people ask me, do you love Atlanta? And I was like, because I miss the community. I miss how much people care. When you're over there east of Main Street, it's this tight-knit community where everyone knows everyone. They go based on your last name. I remember I got to Buffalo. They said, what's your last name? Who are your people? Who's your family? Where does your mom work? It's the food, the culture. Like, it's still a community where recipes are passed down. Like, there's some recipes I learned just from being in Buffalo that they were not on Pinterest or in cookbooks. It's because they're being passed down generationally through families. The shopping, meeting up, talking, like, people still really, really know each other, and they really care about each other. They take care of each other. Churches, everyone knows if I need anything done in Buffalo, I'm starting at a church. Mm-hmm. I'm starting with the pastor because they can plug me into anyone. They are the hubs essentially on the east side of Buffalo. So it's this amazing place with amazing people who really know each other and care about each other. There's this joke, like, there's certain areas where you don't have cell phone coverage, and that's probably why people still know each other. You can't even use your cell phone, so you actually have to talk to people in certain parts of the east side of Buffalo. It's just one of the most amazing places, honestly.
Do you have a favorite place? Is there a favorite place that you miss in that neighborhood?
Is there a favorite place I miss? Honestly, I've had some of the best catfish in my life at Fat Cats. It's off of Kensington. So I know you didn't ask this question, but I've gotten it. And people are saying, how can you be integrated in this community, without just being like, hello, I'm a white person and I want to explore a black neighborhood. Like, explore things like that. Go to some restaurants, stop by that library. I don't know. Even the Broadway Market, that's on the east side of Buffalo, but people almost think of it as an other, and I'm like, no, that's part of the east side of Buffalo. Like, that almost explains Buffalo, Broadway Market, right? All of the culture and just coming together. But just, start to explore some of the parks. The parks are amazing. There's so many ways to just get to know your neighbors without trying to make a spectacle of, like, hey, what's going on over here?
We are talking with Madison Carter today on Buffalo What's Next. Madison spent about 3 years at Channel 7 here in Buffalo, was back also covering the May 14th shootings on Jefferson Avenue for WGRZ TV. She now works for 11 Alive in Atlanta. Kyle Mackey, my former colleague here, introduced you to our audience, as a matter of fact, a couple of years ago in very memorable fashion. You already brought it up in our conversation. The protests at Niagara Square. This is after the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. And like you said, you were the only black journalist on the scene at that time. But also, can you maybe tell us about your reporting and how you came to understand how the police interacted with the black community here in Buffalo and how it has impacted that community?
It's one of those water is wet kind of stories now, where you look at the numbers of how many people are being pulled over and what kind of tickets are being given out, misdemeanor, who's in the jail. People feel that the black community is over-policed. The whole stop and frisk scenario where people were literally just being pulled over or stopped because they were black. And so this is just a generational thing. This has been happening for a long time in Buffalo, where there's a distrust of police. And so I think that if going back to the protests, things were fine until police started making their presence known. And that's when people started wanting to agitate and really the tensions rose once police were there, because people just don't trust them. I remember the incident with the young lady. This was very, very well known in Buffalo, where the officer called her the C word. That was on the west side of Buffalo. And so there's just all these incidents that come up where people are just, they don't trust police, frankly. And so I always talk about the Buffalo peacemakers, how they're the intermediary between the police. Like, they work with the police department, but they don't have the badge. They don't have the gun. And so often I think it's one of the smartest things the Buffalo Police Department has done. is to really bring in the peacemakers as that assistance to help them to send, hey, somebody that you've seen in your neighborhood before, you know this person, Pastor James Giles is the head of Peacemakers, and he's familiar to people in the community, so they can kind of send him ahead to help with that interaction. And I don't really have the answers as to how you can rebuild that trust, but I think it starts with equity in policing and making sure the police are a part of the community, right? As opposed to just going into community and saying, like, here, we're here to keep you safer, when that's not what they're doing. They're just here to try to make their presence known.
You're from Washington, D.C. You now live in Atlanta, two very heavily black communities, for sure, here in the United States. Can you take us through what you know about Atlanta? You haven't been there that long just yet. But compare what life is like there for a person of color compared to the way it is in Buffalo.
Atlanta is one of the most truly integrated cities I've ever lived in. It's not forced integration. It's just you can go anywhere and see all kinds of different people. And I always say it's so different from Buffalo because in black communities all over America, it's a black community. You know, we go down together, we ride together. There's essentially a lot of people trying to protect, even if you're doing something wrong, there's a sense of needing to protect somebody in the black community if you're another black member. That is not true in Atlanta. It doesn't matter what color you are, people are going to operate how they're going to operate. And that's the most unique thing to me. And I see it play out in Buffalo, I think particularly with the mayor. You have a black mayor, and you have a black community that's very frustrated with him, but they still keep electing him, right? Mm-hmm. Because they continue to want to give him a chance to say, okay, you didn't do your first term, your second term, your third term, or your fourth term. We know your fifth term, you're finally going to get around to helping us out. And it's just like, and that's what I'm used to, like black people, you know, sticking with each other. That's not true of Atlanta at all. And it's the most fascinating thing to me. It really is.
Any understanding of what the case may be? Because when I was there, I only spent a few days there years ago, though I felt a comfort between black and white in Atlanta that I most certainly have not felt here in Buffalo.
That's exactly it. You really, truly can go anywhere, to any upscale restaurant, any, you know, hole-in-the-wall restaurant, and there are black people, there are white people, there are Asian people, there are Indian people. It's incredible, and I love it. And I think it's because there are enough. I've truly, even living outside of Washington, D.C., I never saw a true black middle and upper class. That exists in Atlanta. And that does not exist in other communities, and that's why you see what you see. In Buffalo, there's not a black middle class. There's not a black upper class. Most of the black community is they're living like at or below the poverty line. So there's this sense of we all need to come up together, like we all need to help each other rise. And in Atlanta, enough people have risen above that line to where we can operate in society like anyone else. And I think that that's an incredible model. And if other communities could do that, could get people to rise above the poverty line, to be able to operate with everyone else, like we can all coexist. I wish other cities would just look at a city like this and copy the model.
You may have already just stolen my question here, but one of the things we've been asking here on this program is really what the title is, Buffalo, What's Next? What should be next for the city? I mean, and that's a huge question, and there's no simple answer. But is there something that flashes to your mind when it comes to this is something that could be done, and it could be done quickly. It could help in so many ways.
That's a big question.
Yes.
What could be done? I think the first thing that needs to be done. Let's start at the bottom. The first thing that needs to be done is to improve the health outcomes for people living east of Main Street in Buffalo. Having one grocery store, and I'm going to be honest because I don't live up there anymore, Tops is not the best grocery store. Okay? I can say that because there are no tops here. There are no, advertisers.
And that's why I had you on, Madison, because I wanted someone who could say something like that. No offense to Tops.
Yeah, no offense to Tops.
Right.
But it's not the best grocery store. And people will say, like, I even went in and bought produce there compared to the Wegmans that was next to my place on the west side. The apples to apples are not the same. So I think the first thing that needs to be done is to have a new grocery store. And I see that they're remodeling and reopening the Tops there. I live next to a grocery store here in Atlanta. This is a terrible name, and there's just no way around it. But they call it Murder Kroger because there used to be several homicides at this grocery store, and nobody wanted to go. They tore the whole thing down, and they rebuilt a beautiful store. And it completely changed. Like, people can go there now. They don't have that same association. They still call it that, but it's a different association. So I really would have loved to see them tear down that Tops, but I just know it's not possible because there are no other grocery store options. So first step, improve health outcomes by creating not just one, but several places where people can go to get fresh food and produce. Put a gym somewhere. I remember there's not a gym within 16 miles of the zip code 14215. Like, there's not a major gym. I remember one of my reports, I did some research on that. So I think that is the very first thing that we need to do in order to help grow, because that improves life expectancy, that improves ability to work, to have employment. So start with health, and then have me back on the show, and we can talk about step 2, 3, and 4.
And Madison, I couldn't help but notice as you were giving that answer, though you were only here 3 years, you were using the word "we." You have a strong emotional connection to the city.
I do. I tell people, like, it's home.
Madison Carter, I really appreciate your time. Continued success in Atlanta, and hopefully the next time you come back to Buffalo will be to stay here for a little while longer.
We'll see.
This is Buffalo What's Next on WBFO.
One of the best ways to support WBFO is to become a valuable sustainer. It is the most mutually beneficial relationship we can have with our members. Whether you give annually or monthly as a sustaining member, you allow not only us, but also yourselves to be financially prepared throughout the year. Plus, the amount you give is entirely up to you. Whatever you are comfortable with, no amount is too small. Please take a moment to visit our website at WBFO.org or give us a call at 1-877-456-8870 to donate today. Thank you.
Hey, we used to love this song. We still do, but we used to too. WBFO The Bridge, college radio for adults. Check us out on the TuneIn app or on your smart speakers, and of course, WBFO.org/thebridge.
You're listening to Buffalo What's Next. There are several ways for you to join the conversation. Send us a message now on Twitter at WBFO. Email us at news@WBFO.org. or just press the Talk to Us button on the WBFO app and leave a comment we can use on the air. We're here for you. This is Buffalo What's Next.
This is Dave Debo. It's been 1 month since the racist massacre at the Tops Market on Jefferson took the lives of 10 people and injured 3 others. Since that time, WBFO has been gathering the voices of the community here on this program, talking of grief and progress. So let's take the entire next segment now to hear some of those voices, a collection of what people have been saying and feeling over these past few weeks as we move away from the day of the shooting.
I think it's important for us to say right now that we're not doing all right.
Education activist Sam Radford.
And so often you want to say things are fine, things are well, but in a lot of ways, this is a blow that you feel, and it reverberates, you know what I'm saying? So the community is, struggling to come back from.
Psychologist Ursuline Bankhead.
It's a mix. So, I was able to go down on Friday and offer some support to some colleagues. And it was really, I would say emotionally, for myself and others, a mixed bag, where you have collegiality, you have community support, and you see everyone coming together. But at the same time, there was this feeling of, unrelenting grief, as you're there. I would assume that it's, the normal mixture of emotions that people go through.
Buffalo Poet Laureate Jillian Hainsworth.
There's a lot of people dealing with a lot of trauma, and racial trauma is so unique because you didn't have to be in tops to be traumatized by what happened. Knowing that you can be a target because of the color of your skin is so traumatizing. I think a lot of people who are not Black or brown can empathize to an extent, because mass violence is something that we can all say is wrong regardless of what incited it. But unless you are Black, right? Unless you are constantly navigating all these systems that are designed to work against you, and then you still have to deal with the pain of knowing that someone went into a grocery store and committed a violent act of terrorism against people just because they look like you. After watching it happen to Trayvon Martin and to Mike Brown and Sandra Bland and George Floyd and Eric Garner, and we can go on and on and on, you'd never be able to fully understand it.
Police reform activist Dijon Hall.
I'm surviving, and I think that that is enough for now.
Is it really enough for now for the people who live in the communities that are affected by?
Well, as someone who lost a family member in the tragic incident that took place on that Saturday, for me, it is enough. I think there are a lot of people who are ready for action, and by all means, they should move forward for that. But some of us who have been doing this work for a very long time might be a little fatigued by this. And so surviving is enough so long as we don't remain in ruin. Some would say don't rest in the ruin, and I'm not going to.
Garnell Whitfield before the United States Senate.
My mother's life mattered. My mother's life mattered. And your actions here today will tell us how much it matters to you.
Zanetta Everhart speaking before Congress.
We thank you for all of your thoughts and your prayers. Thank you for all of the love and support you have shown us during this difficult time. But I also say to you today, your thoughts and prayers are not enough. We need you to stand with us in the days, weeks, months, and years to come, and be ready to go to work and help us to create the change that this country so desperately needs.
I want to be clear that while I am so glad that we are all here together, our goal today is not for another kumbaya moment. Thoughts and prayers are not enough. We need sustainable movement.
And the Reverend Julian Armand Cook is with us for the discussion now.
I think the most uncomfortable truth that has to be told here is that this is not happenstance. This is not a coincidence. This is not a tragedy in the sense of something that we could not control, but that human beings, that the way we have designed our society has a big hand in what occurred in that Tops market and the conditions that existed in the community before.
And by that, you're saying basically systemic racism.
Systemic racism.
Miles Gresham is with the Partnership for the Public Good.
We can dismantle the policies that caused it in the first place, right? So we can be unequivocal about the remnants of redlining that still exist in private banks today. We can make sure that there are more opportunities for affordable housing, not just in the city of Buffalo, but also in the county where affordable housing numbers are quite abysmal. We can support and fund the Black-led organizations on the ground that are responding to this crisis right now. I mean, there's an African Heritage Food Co-op that's been in existence for years that owns farmland, that works to deliver fresh produce to Black and brown people in this city. Those people have been working overtime since this shooting happened. Fund their grocery store, fund their brick and mortar so that there's more than one option for Black people on the east side of Buffalo to go and get their fruits and veg,
When you go to the east side and then you juxtapose that to Williamsville, to the Orchard Parks, to the suburbs, what do you see?
Talulu Adunse is with the UB Law School.
I think the first thing is visual. So I sometimes joke about this, that I know I'm on the east side when I hit my first pothole in the street. So I think visually you see the infrastructure issues on the inside, and that it's so clear that financially we haven't invested enough in infrastructure. So by that I mean paved roads, reducing blighted buildings, and picking up waste on the streets and things like that. So I think there's the visual of the infrastructure, and then you also see visually, you see more people of color, particularly Black people, who are using public transportation as opposed to vehicles. So you can actually see the people who live in the neighborhood because of their greater reliance on the public transport system as opposed to Williamsville. If you're to walk outside, you'll see some folks walking, taking nice strolls, but most people are in their cars. So there's a really stark difference visually, I would say, in thinking about two things, just the infrastructure and then who we're seeing. And we're seeing Black people on the east side and then more white people in the suburban neighborhood.
Mark Talley lost his mother, Geraldine, in the shooting.
My community is just basically a picture-perfect representation of what socioeconomics is. If you look on the east side, whether it's the Maston area, the Fruit Belt area, like it's a perfect synopsis of basically you have generational poverty, which is from the poverty cycle, which is in a low socioeconomic status area, which can create food deserts. You have the majority of people coming from single-parent households, the majority of people lacking a college diploma. You have people who are barely not even making enough money. And all of this is a perfect synopsis for somebody to come in, scout the area. Because basically, nobody really cares about that area. And you can take it back to the Fair Housing Act in the 70s, which created all of this gerrymandering and redlining, which caused the majority of east side areas to receive lack of funding. Nothing like this, I believe, would not have happened in East Amherst or Orchard Park or Clarence or Kenmore, because those areas more than likely receive more funding. They have more areas where people can go to shop. It's definitely not food deserts over there. You look over on the east side, basically kind of a well-known open secret is if you live in an area surrounded by a lot of Black people, you're not going to receive that high mortgage. Your property values will be very low. So even if you wanted to leave that area, you couldn't. And if you want to receive a mortgage or refinance, you're not going to get it. They say if your area has a lot of corner stores, liquor stores, a lot of bodegas, that's considered a bad area. All of this causes white flight, so you have a lot of people stuck in those areas really forever.
Educator Harvey Miles.
I may buy something on Facebook Marketplace or tell someone to meet me there who may be white, and they would tell me, I don't feel safe there. But here it is. You had a white individual come from miles away and put terror on my community. And not only that person, but you have people calling in, making, false terroristic threats on schools in my community, in places of worship in my community, further making harm to my community.
How does it make you feel?
It's a double standard that's perpetuated. It's like you don't want us in your community, but then you won't let us rest in our community. Nor will you give us the resources in our community. Buffalo, you look at Buffalo, Buffalo is growing. There's a lot of development in Buffalo. But in my life, yes, they may give us shiny toys, but we're not making the money to access those shiny toys that they give us as saying we're helping Buffalo develop.
Fruit Belt activist Denise Barr.
People love to do that, right? They talk about the East Side. Even when you see on the news, when they show the clips over there's crime, right? It's on the East Side. Well, yeah, but there's a lot of neighborhoods on the East Side. So it would be like talking about, the whole community of Buffalo and showing a film clip and you're like, okay, so where is that?
Buffalo Poet Laureate Jillian Hainsworth.
We can't keep bringing the books to white people and hoping that they read them. If you want to be intentional and you want to learn and you want to be a part of the solution, it's time for you to step out of your comfort zone and venture in, because all of the value should not go where you're comfortable.
Attorney John Elmore.
I've read over 600 pages of this killer's social media chats and discussions, and it is just shocking to me and eye-opening to me the extent of this underworld of white supremacy, the number of people who sympathize with him, the potential of other copycat people like him, the people that encouraged him and shared those views, and not just views that were anti-black, but anti-Jew, anti-gay, anti-Islam. It is scary. This group of people that hate to the point where they want to just commit violence against people that they've never met, that they don't know from another city, just because of their sexual orientation, their religion, because of their killer, that believe in some sort of racial purity, that America is only for Europeans, and kind of believe in an ethnic cleansing type of thing. It is scary to me to see that these people are out there and how active they are, and this sculpt culture. It's almost like a community. So when you look at what happened to here in Buffalo, this wasn't a lone wolf. This was somebody that got information, intelligence. People were aware and encouraged him for doing what he did.
African American food co-op leader Alexander Wright.
I would love to have a real conversation on race, real conversation on white supremacy in Western New York. Have these tough conversations, because if we don't, we're never going to get better. As long as we can live in a silo, as long as I can live in my palace in Orchard Park and only come to Buffalo during the Sabres game, or only come to Buffalo to have a drink and go back, and I never interact with folks that are here, then I can keep a stereotype. What I learned, I'll give you an example. I ran track in high school. There is a misnomer that white men can't jump.
Okay.
I saw a white man high jump 8 feet. You see what I'm saying? But when you have that interaction, that destroys those stereotypes. As long as we don't have interaction, as long as we can't see each other and be around each other, we will always be in this mess.